Welcome to the Kick the Dogma podcast. I'm your host, John Emmerich, and I'm with Gary Hoover, Executive Director of the Murphy Institute, Professor of Economics and Affiliate Professor of Law at Tulane University, and now the author of Ladder or Lottery, Economic Promises and the Reality of Who Gets Ahead. Welcome, Gary.
Thank you very much for having me. Sincerely, thank you.
You're a busy man, and I realized as I read off all those titles. How'd you find time to write this book, and how did it come together?
Well, the book is actually the culmination of everything that I've been thinking about and working on for over 2 decades. It actually started with some work I had done with some folks who did transnational and domestic terrorism. And interesting, one of the things that we found was that people were becoming disaffected. They were becoming very upset with their status. Why? Because they had been given a promise that if they received certain certificates or certain training, that employment would be there for them. And what we found was that the numbers of people who were poor or disaffected never changed, but the composition did. Those people who found themselves on the outs were now people who had bachelor's degrees, but now were driving cabs. These were people who had had master's degrees. And as they became more disaffected, more disillusioned, because they were given these promises, they then protested. Unfortunately, they protested violently, but that's what started this whole thing. As I started thinking about, if you think about the back part of the title, economic promises and the reality of who gets ahead. So these people were given these economic promises, they didn't come true, and these people became very, very disillusioned. Fast forward to today and all of the other work I had done over many different avenues. And I kept saying the same theme come up. You really mustn't make promises to people and then not keep those promises. People will remember and become quite angry about it.
All right. Well, that's helpful because I was blown away as I was reading the book that you were able to bring in the Arab Spring into this discussion. I was like, wow, how did he get that? And now I understand a little bit about that, how that came to be. Now, most people are going to know kind of what economics and law professors do. Tell us about the Murphy Institute. I found reading about that very interesting and relevant to what you just said and the rest of our discussion.
Right. Well, the Murphy Institute is actually built around this idea of political economy. There's a traditional view, but that's not how I was trained. The way I was trained in political economy was to think about over here you've got policymakers who are turning knobs and changing policy. For instance, RFK is changing policy as it relates to healthcare through vaccines. Linda McMahon is changing policy as it relates to K through 12 education, right? Over here, you've got markets that react to those policies. You've got the housing market and the labor market and the currency market and the stock market. And so, what is the dance between policy and markets? What we do here at Murphy is look at those interactions through three lenses: through institutions, through rulemaking, you can call that law or regulation, and through ethics or morality. So just because a policymaker can change or turn a knob on policy, really, ethically, morally, should they? Should they be making decisions that impact people without those people's voice being heard or in the room? Think about over our legal framework. Should there be certain guardrails that keep policymakers from benefiting in the market over certain actions that they take? And obviously, institutionally, right? What type of institutional framework do we have here in the United States? We have one here that has these three parts of government: the judicial, the legislative, and the executive branch. And so that impacts both policy and markets.
Yeah, and wow, you mentioned a couple things that are so relevant to what we're seeing today with politicians taking advantage of their position and I've thought a lot about this since Well, gosh, and basically the last since last January, that we took for granted concepts like rule of law, okay, and due process, right, and checks and balances, as if they were buttons that we flicked on and that's it. And now I realize over the last year and a half that those are, to your point, those are ethical values that we all agreed existed. But as soon as we stop believing they're important, or they can go away, you know?
Exactly. So that's what we do here at Murphy because basically, if you think about the stuff in my book, I talk about a social contract. None of this stuff is written, right? It's not a written contract to where we can go to a court and we can, sue for damages. It's only as good as the faith that both parties have that this contract exists.
And it's important, and that it's important. That's a
Critic-
foundation.
critically.
Right. All right. Well, let's get into the book. You start off talking about income inequality, and I think we both agree. We suggest wealth inequality, which feels again like the issue of our time. Maybe going back to the 20s, maybe for really the whole country's history until the New Deal. But are the issues here unique to the United States in this moment in time? Because you just talked about internationally, you talk about the Arab Spring. I kind of feel like it is, just because that's the news I get. I get Bezos, I get Musk, I get Palantir, I get all these. Is the level of income inequality that we're seeing now unique to the United States?
It's unique in a different way, and so I'm gonna throw a twist on you that you probably didn't expect. What most people say is, look, it really doesn't matter how much income inequality we have. The key is whether or not we have income mobility.
Right,
So, like with any random draw, people might end up at the random draw at the bottom of the distribution. They might end up at the middle. They might end up at the top. But that really doesn't matter so much as long as I can start at the bottom. But if I do the things that society says in my social contract that I should do,
right.
then I can move up just as well as anyone. So people are going to say, look, the starting point doesn't really matter. Not here in the United States, particularly, right? We have, as my book says, we have a ladder. So if you're on a lower rung of the ladder, and you don't like being at a lower rung of the ladder, then you need to climb. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you methods. Society is going to give people methods and avenues that they can use to climb. So, hey, it really doesn't matter where you start as long as you can get to where you presumably want to be. But that also does something else in the US context because we believe in freedom of choice. So we'll say, look, given that we've created this perfect ladder and you could climb if you wanted to, wherever you are, if you're at the bottom, well, that must mean you want to be there. And if you want to be there, who am I to interfere with your free choice to be poor and hungry? I shall do you the favor of allowing you to be as poor and as hungry as you want. And that is almost uniquely United States.
American. Yeah.
Well, because think about this, right? We say, look, Musk is way up on the top and others are way up on the top, but you can be too. So it doesn't really matter what did these folks at the top do that you need to do? You need to get out front. You need to be a risk taker. You need to be an entrepreneur. If you do those things, then you'll be successful. You'll be able to climb up the ladder just like these folks. So most people aren't going to push back on the inequality part a lot. They're going to say the mobility part. And that's where I come in and I say that you've been sold a bill of goods in that the mobility isn't what we actually sold it to be. For instance, some of my other research, like I said, this is the culmination of a bunch of work I've done. And actually, I take that back. It's not even my research. It's just research that's been out there forever, which shows that, if you are born into poverty in the United States, there is a better than average chance that you're going to die in poverty too.
Right.
So, this idea of mobility that you can start out at the bottom and rise up to the top, you can occupy, a rung on the economic ladder like these folks way up at the top. That's where the disenchantment comes, and that is something that I think is probably more uniquely a part of the American mythos that anyone can move up.
Oh, you hear it all the time. It's a defense of kind of neoliberalism and things like that. But so go. You just did it, and it was the next question on my list. But the term social contract is
Right.
what you were referring to, and it's so critical to the book. There are two terms. One is that social contract. So what we're saying is this has been foundational to this country's growth and prosperity, that this social contract existed. I do the things that this society tells me uh, I should do, and if I do them, I will move up the ladder. And what we're experiencing now, and when did, for how long, we're saying, unfortunately, that contract is broken. It's been broken in some other countries that you've looked at, but it's specifically broken here, that the bottom rungs of those ladders are busted. We can't, to use that visual, we can't reach up anymore and pull ourselves. Or actually, I think what you're saying is in the book, hey man, I did those things. I
Exactly.
kept my nose clean during high school. I graduated. I went to college. I got a degree, and now I don't have the job that historically you would have expected to get that leap in income and potential from doing that work. Is that closer to the whole?
Right. So the social contract is exactly that. It's not written. It just says, I'm going to give you a checklist. And so before you come to me and you complain about your station, I want to know if you did these things, and we'll talk about those in a bit. And if you went down the checklist, I promise you that we will build out the infrastructure here. We in society will build out the infrastructure such that if you follow this checklist, these things will lead you up the ladder. So, what we're finding and what makes people most frustrated is when they realize not those who didn't do anything, right? Because they're like, look, I didn't participate,
Right.
but those who did. And they're being lumped in with those who didn't. They're like, I followed the checklist.
Right.
Is a social contract. I did my part. You told me that if I did this, I would get to the next rung. What people are saying, if we just push this ladder analogy, is that yes, the next rung is there, but it's too high. I can't reach it even though it's there. The next rung is there, but the rung is broken. The next rung is there, but there are so many people occupying it that there's no room for me. The next rung is there, but it's slanted. So, what type of ladder are we actually talking about here? In that you tell me, here's the next rung, here's what you do to get to the next rung, and I can see it, but I can't reach it. So, is it
Yeah.
really there?
Yeah. Yeah. Now that leads me to the second term, undeserving, which I struggled with at first, but I think you just clarified it for me. But tell the listeners, where
Right.
you have people that did the things that they were supposed to do and ended up in the same place as people that didn't do. They chose not to do the things that they. So walk through that term.
Well, first off, for almost anybody who's ever embraced these two terms, um, don't beat me up. This was a this was a conscious decision to turn these terms on their head because I wanted to get people out of their comfort zone and I wanted people to actually think and engage. And that's what happens when you take these terms and turn them upside down. So it wasn't an accident. I did this on
No,
purpose
absolutely, and
to
and, and that's it. You did it to me. I'm like, wait, what's he saying? And you
exactly.
have to work through it.
Right. And so think about it this way. Um, I've laid out a roadmap and I'm saying, look, if you want to get from here to there, here's the map and here's the route you have to take. And if you didn't take the route and you're ending up lost, then we're going to say, well, you deserve to be lost. I gave you a map and you ended up lost. So you're deserving. I'm going to say that the undeserving are people who are going to say, but hey, I followed the map exactly as you laid it out. And yet I'm lost. I'm sitting next to this guy.
Yeah.
He got here because he didn't follow the map. I followed the map and I
I'm in the
ended up
same
next to
place.
this guy. And now you're looking at the two of us and you're saying, well, both of you are non-map reading individuals. And there's a group of folks who are going to push back and say, hold on, hold on. Don't confuse me with that guy. That guy just headed out and didn't follow any directions.
Right.
Followed the directions. So maybe it's not on me. Maybe it's on the the structure that you put together. Those people are going to say, hey, I am undeserving. I don't deserve to be here, and I don't deserve to be lumped with that guy. That's how I'm using the terms undeserving. I'm saying that there are a group of people who are lower down on the income strata who are going to say, I don't deserve to be here. I don't deserve to be lumped with those people. A purposeful reusing of the terms to get people to engage because society is quick to want to use moral judgments and discard these people and say, look, you haven't done these things. I actually use the terms flea in a jar.
Yeah.
You are fleas in a jar. The lid has been taken off. You could jump out of that jar anytime you want to, and you didn't. So that's on you. You are deserving because there's no top on that lid. What another group of people are going to say, I see that the lid is open. I have jumped not once, twice. I tried to crawl. I've actually tried to stand on that guy's head and get out that way. Every way that I could have conceivably tried to get out of this jar, I didn't. I am undeserving of being in this jar.
And I'll put my own spin on that analogy is what's more disheartening and potentially toxic is I know that the lid was on there for some time. I know the lid is off, but I don't believe I can get out. I don't and generationally, like, if that happens to you when you're 21, 22, and all of a sudden you're 32, and it has, in your mind, it's God, it's so worrisome and disheartening. That's what I see now generationally, losing
Right.
a whole.
And the consequences of it though is that when it's just one person, when it's just you, you might internalize that to yourself. But what I'm seeing is that people are talking to their neighbors and they're talking to their friends and they're realizing that this thing has to be systemic because it's not just me. It's that person and that person and that person.
Right,
And now we've got a coalition of people who believe the same thing, and now we're going to say it's not just us.
right. Now, before we go on, there's you say in the book that racial discrimination so blatantly linked to long-term wealth inequality because of very specific things like real estate markets and redlining and access to credit markets and lack of fairness in lending and borrowing, uh, and passing down accumulated wealth generationally. But you say that doesn't fit the definition of the social contract as you've defined it.
I don't want it to. It
Okay.
absolutely should, but I don't want it to. Here's what I want it to be. I want this social contract to be an action-based contract to
Right.
where I can say, I did this. You told me to do this. I did this, and I didn't get the results. If we let it be a racial based contract, which has its merits, and that's why I spend that much time in the book, you don't pick your race, right? You can't say,
Right.
I I did this. You didn't pick that. No one picked their race. No one picked their parents. No one picked their family. Believe me, I would not have picked this family. Anyway, but that's
No,
another
I know.
story. No one picks their family, so I could have used it, but that book has already been written.
Right.
Scholars way better than me. I wanted to talk about something that was action based that I could definitively go to and I could say, I did this. You told me to do this, and I did this. I have the receipts that I did what you told me to do. And in fact, in a race based context, the sides are already drawn, right? There's nothing else to be done because you already said, okay, these folks will be privileged, these folks will not be privileged. In the discussion. That one's over. I wanted it to be one to where anybody could say, black or white or any other race, could say, I did this, I should be moving ahead. And we could say to this group, you didn't do that, you shouldn't be moving ahead.
Right. Yeah, and so let's talk about some of the and I like that perspective. It's more about doing
Yeah,
than it
action
is
based.
what's been right, exactly. So let's but there are things that can be done that, I guess what I'm trying to get is when did this all start? Like, what are from a chronology, and there are things I can point to have been going on for 40 years, very slowly, kind of unraveling the social contract, if you will. And like one of the great equalizers, and you do them in sequence in the book: healthcare, education, entrepreneurship. Like it's interesting to think about if you only had one thing to do. I'm going to get back to K through 12 education in a second, but I'm obsessed with healthcare, especially after reading your book, because if you think about like public education feels like a lottery determined by where your parents can afford to buy a home.
Exactly.
That
It's
that's for sure.
dictated by zip code. Absolutely.
And we can talk about that, for an hour, but some of that has also been written. But healthcare, the knock-on consequences are there as well. I almost feel like if a family wasn't worried about how they're going to pay for healthcare, if the kids were healthier, the parents were healthier, they're not missing work days, they're not worried about going into bankruptcy from healthcare debt, which is a completely foreign concept to the rest of the world.
Exactly.
That the knock-on effects of that would be massive. Like you could not change a lot of other things, and there would be tangible uh, benefit to that. Why? Here's a question I've never heard anyone ask. Maybe you have. Universal healthcare is polled over 60% for like 20, 25 years across the entire U.S. population, not just Democrats and Republicans. And politicians don't even talk about it anymore in debates, especially presidential debates. Why isn't corporate America beating down doors in Washington? I feel like this would be, I'm thinking about, hey man, if it motivates you economically, I don't care what your reasons are. Let's just get it done, because this is not the Manhattan Project. We're not trying to discover a new molecule. We don't have to invent anything. It's being done all around the world. We could cherry pick the best practices from around the world and create a system. If we had no system today and we decide to develop a healthcare system, and I know I'm preaching to the choir on this one, no one in a billion years would do what we have created, which is just incrementalism over 75 years. Why isn't corporate America beating down doors in Washington to get universal healthcare? What are the remaining barriers besides the obvious, the insurance company, in lack of campaign finance regulation, kind of paying people to not bring it up? But it was
It,
first in your list, and I loved it because I'm there.
it's a strange thing. Let me step back a bit and talk about this, right? So, as in the nature of my job as an economics professor and scholar, I am in contact with business leaders
Right.
often. And you ask a business leader, right? You're thinking about relocating to an area. What are you looking for in a local workforce? I get two answers back invariably. Now, there'll be other things they'll ask about, but when you ask them about a local workforce, the first thing they're going to say is that they need a local workforce that's trainable. In other words, education. What's going on with the education? And so we can or not even bother to go back to that because that's so obvious.
Right.
The second thing that you will get almost universally from business leaders is that they're going to say, from a local workforce, I need a workforce that is going to show up, meaning that I need a workforce that is healthy. So the two things that you would think business leaders would go as heavy as possible into would be education policy and health
Healthcare.
policy.
Yeah,
Well, health policy, which would then provide
I
health
got you.
care.
Yeah.
Right, because that would allow people to come to work. You know, and here's where it gets a little bit wonkish, and I won't walk through the whole thing, but the thing that makes a worker the most productive is being healthy. A healthy worker is more productive, will miss less work. And I'm not just talking about physical health, I'm also talking about mental health
Yep.
also. Um, if you have a worker who is healthy, that is a worker who will be way, way, way more productive. And that's what you want. You want to get, if you're going to pay this wage to this person, you want that person in your own self interest, in your own business self interest. You want your workers to be as healthy as possible, and that's why you see these programs to where some employers will offer benefits to people who will stop smoking. This is why some employers will offer, hey, we're going to have a group weight loss session, and we're going to offer prizes to those units that can lose weight. It is baffling to me, given how much productivity, which translates into dollars and cents, that we have, yet we don't make it a priority. Now, we'll tell people as a social contract, as a premise of a social contract, that you should be healthy, but we don't provide the infrastructure for it. As you pointed out a second ago, we're going to say to folks, look, uh, you should be healthy and you should have a job that provides health care. But then, how in the world is it that I have a job, I got health care, and I could still face something called medical bankruptcy? Not bankruptcy because
Mhm.
of bad financial planning, I took risks, but my own health could dictate my financial status.
Yeah, and use the term in the book, and it's so tied into this concept of social contract, and health is the best example, through no fault of my own, right?
None.
Yeah. By the way, are there any, because it's so fascinating that we still have state by state regulations on these two biggest issues, completely different experiences depending on where you live. I have my own bias. I'm not gonna throw it out there. I want to hear what you have to say, or if there are states that are doing things at the state level with the topics we're just talking about, that therefore in the long term has generated more companies wanting to have headquarters there, and people wanting to live there because the quality of life is better. And the corporations, to your point, they want their, it's attractive to, if they want to attract talent, they want to start a business, they want to open an office in a place where people that are thinking about these things and want to live. But are there states that are doing kind of really good things?
They are, but my work is more at the national level.
Okay,
In that, when you get down to the state level, it becomes a bit granular, and then the social contracts become state contracts. And I'm thinking more on a nation state level, that we as Americans,
I
and
got you.
that's one of the problems.
Yes, it is.
You know, we shouldn't have to have
Right.
this state over that state moving there. Aren't we all supposed to be calling ourselves Americans? So if that's the case, your question totally encapsulates the problem. Why in the world are we thinking about other states engaging in this and others not? If it is a social contract, and it's through no fault of your own, to where you're quick to then blame the person for having a medical emergency when they had insurance.
Right.
That was sort of the point.
Right. Right. Let's talk. The tricky one you bring up is family structure.
It's not tricking to me.
It's not and tell me. And I said, I'm thinking politically, because now I was reading it again, and in this country, you can't tell people what they can and cannot do, and but I also know there was a study, God, 30 years ago that came out and said, if you can do these three things, if you can graduate high school, if you not have a child out of wedlock and wait till you're 20 years old to have a kid. Now, this is coming from the right. I admit that. Um, the odds of you ending up in poverty are like less than 1%. And which I've had that memory as I was reading. But you talk about family structure and why it's not a tricky one to you.
Right. Here's the problem. You totally told the situation. It says, look, family structure is here's the social contract. Do exactly what John just said. Right.
Right.
Uh, and in the book, I talk about this thing where it says, look, don't have a child until you hit these money milestones. Right. So you shouldn't have a child until you've secured your future. The problem I have with that is that in America, remember we were just talking about mobility.
Right.
There is a better than average chance you're never going to hit the money milestone.
Got it.
So you've just told a significant portion of your society that they are excluded from the only thing, and let me be clear about this. If you look back over the entire history of man, not this country, since man started walking upright, right? The only thing that's happened, nations have come and gone, right?
Right.
We have been sent man to the moon. But the one thing man has been able to do over the history of our race, the human race, is to reproduce. It is the one thing you don't have to be rich,
Right.
you don't have to be poor, you don't have to live in this country. The one thing we were able to do that connects us with our humanity is only humans can create other humans. But you're telling me that I shouldn't be allowed because I haven't hit my money milestones. I shouldn't be allowed
Right.
to have children. Here's another point to it, though. What we know is that as countries' income standards grow up, their ability to have children actually goes down, right? So
Yeah.
we saw
Fertility rates fall.
fertility rates fall exactly.
Yeah.
And as such, what you would be saying then is for those who don't hit the money milestone, okay, you hang out, you don't have kids, and then those who are higher up the income ladder, they'll make up the difference. That is not how child production works.
Right.
That is a myth. And if we didn't have people who did not hit the money milestones having children, we would not have enough people on this planet Earth. You cannot tell people.
No, and to tie it all together, I referenced that study by saying it's 30 years old. So if you did this study in the mid 90s, it was based on data from the mid 40s when the social contract existed, and we're probably correlation is not causation, but that study kind of made sense. But really, what was it about was the social contract. But and the other thing about what you just said, I don't want to bring this all the way down, but one of the things I worry about when we talk about the social contract and the ladder, bringing yourself up to opportunities, is what opportunities exist today. What are those opportunities, and
Right.
how much? As an economist, you know this, and I was an investment manager on funds and a securities analyst. Like if there's a big restaurant in Denver and the population of Denver grows 3% a year, there's a good chance that your sales at this restaurant are going to grow 3% a year. Now, you have a restaurant in somewhere in Illinois and the population's declining 3% a year. Good luck generating sales growth. So, yeah, growth is kind of it's right. It's the engine. Without it, I don't know what we do, man.
Yeah, well, we should have co-authored on the book because you see it the way I do. So yeah,
Yeah.
I don't actually. You started out by saying that one was tricky. I don't see it as being tricky. Um, Money milestones. What you have to do is give people instead of telling them that, you have to tell them that there are opportunities for them and their families.
Yeah, no, and you're right. I was misinterpreting my memory of that section, which you're not telling people that they, what to do. You can't. You shouldn't. It's actually the opposite of how I remembered it. So we talked about the individual. Let's talk about institutions more. And starting in sequence in the book, you talk about Occupy Wall Street, which felt almost like, I don't know how to define it in the context of the discussion, almost like a reverse social contract violation to me, where Wall Street brought the world's financial system to its knees. And the view is, and I could go into this because I lived it. I was managing funds through all of this. That view is taxpayers bailed out Wall Street, but I get very specific about CEOs and CFOs and really debt holders, that were paid 100 cents on the dollar instead of the 25 cents that those bonds at AIG and Fannie Mae were worth and all that stuff. But you've forgotten more about that than I'll never know, because you start off saying you worked with the Fed and things like that. But how does that discussion, Occupy Wall Street, fit into this social contract discussion we've been having?
Right. So, without getting wonkish and not going back into history, here's what we ended up seeing. For most people in the United States, the way that you build your wealth and the way that you move yourself up is through home ownership. For most of us, the most expensive asset we're going to ever hold is going to be our homes. And so that's a social contract. We tell people, look, you want to build wealth, and to build wealth that could potentially be intergenerational,
Right.
the way that you do it is through home ownership. And so what you had was a group of individuals who were like, I can finally get into the promise, the social contract, which says, here is how I get up that ladder by home ownership. Wow. Isn't it nice that they're allowing me to buy a home with low documentation, or actually no
No docs.
documentation? Now, some of us were fraudsters, and we were clearly in this thing trying to just pass the buck. But for many of us, we were like, this is my chance to get a part of the American dream. I buy a home with all the best of intentions, and I'm glad to have it, even though I don't understand the financing of it, and I don't know what a balloon payment means, and I don't know any of that stuff. The financial crisis hits. We are really, really doing bad. We're, nearly 4 million people lost their homes during this period. 4 million people lost their homes. That is more people than live in the state of Louisiana. It would
Right.
it would be like the entire state was evicted.
Right.
That's a huge number.
Yeah.
So we got these people who are now out, and the government says, well, we can't have this. We got to step in and we got to bail people out. But we don't bail out the folks who lost their homes. We ended up bailing out Wall Street. And so, yeah, the phrase was, Wall Street got bailed out. I got sold out.
Right.
People were genuinely upset with that. And they're going to say, I didn't have anything to do with that. I don't know what, credit default swaps are. I don't know what any of those things are. I was just the person who bought a home. So, um, I feel that the social contract has been broken. Now, Herman Cain, who I quote in the book, he has this quote that I'll never forget. He says, "Look, um, if you're not rich and you don't have a job, don't blame Wall Street, don't blame the big banks, blame yourself." And people did. People said, wow, it's really, I really must have messed up, until they started talking to their neighbors and looking around. And then they realized, you know what? This wasn't a violation of the contract on my part. I am undeserving. Going back to
Right.
our discussion before, I followed the map. I did what I was told to do. And yet now I'm in worse shape now than I was before.
Yeah.
That is a violation of a social contract. That's a violation of the promise. You promised me that home ownership would be my way up the ladder. And in fact, home ownership, through no fault of my own, has actually dropped me significantly down the ladder.
And I think it's in this section of the book and this topic on real estate where you use the term tipping point. Like, of all the things that have taken place, and I agree with you, man. I think that the great financial crisis, if we're looking back, and as I was talking about how there had been kind of trickling effects of taking away the social contract and the social safety net, dismantling the New Deal for 50 years. But if there was one event, just a monumental moment that you can look back to trace our current state of being, that in the negative sense, it was that event. And it's funny, I was telling my wife, we're everyone's laughing about people like Marjorie Taylor Greene turning tide on Donald Trump, and all of a sudden people like me, progressives, going, God damn, I can't, how do I agree with Marjorie Taylor Greene so much all of a sudden? But I'm telling you, if you go back and find it, I remember the day she turned. And you know what it was? It was her two Gen Z sons coming to her and saying, Mom, I can't afford rent. Forget about buying a home. I can't even afford rent. So now it comes, sorry, home to her on a personal level. And I think that's what's been missing is the people that write the laws, haven't been affected by this the way, 90% of the US population has. So I think, what can we do? So, I played this game with my last interview. I think I already referenced her, Michelle Dickerson. I said, okay, you didn't get elected president, but you didn't want it. But the president comes to you and says, Gary, what cabinet seat do you want? You pick it. What do you want to be in charge of? You only get one. What would you
Uh,
do?
I'd probably go with the now defunct Department of Education.
That's what she said.
Yeah, I'd
Yeah,
probably I'd probably and if since that one doesn't exist and I had to pick one that actually is here, I'd probably think about the Department of Labor, which is on its last legs too.
right.
Uh, so it's hard to think of departments now because
I know.
what's left?
I know.
The
You know.
well, yeah. To go back to something you mentioned though about the tipping point, what happens is when I think it's just me, and I think, as Herman Cain said, that I blame myself, then I feel that I am deserving of what happened to me. But when I talk to my neighbor, and then I talk to John, and then I talk to this person, and we gather together, we start to build a coalition, and there becomes a tipping point to where all of us realize, you know what? It's actually not me as an individual. There is something systemically wrong here.
Yeah, and so we'll put education aside for a minute. We have about 10 minutes left, and I want to get back to it. But what can be done besides obvious things? I think they're obvious, but I'm not fully involved professionally anymore the way you are with the housing issue. And I look at things like one hedge fund or owns 25,000 homes in the suburbs of Atlanta, and they go in and get bulk purchase discounts, and then they sell it to another fund for a gain, and they report the gains, and then they have a basically monopoly control over rent in the area. That stuff is that someone somewhere, a mayor, a governor, and they did it in I think Berlin. The mayor of Berlin just said, "This, we're done. We're not. This is no longer allowed." I don't know how they set the limits, but what can be done about the housing crisis, and just not just ownership, but rent, having a place to live that you can afford. It's not 50, 55, 60% of your weekly paycheck.
You're exactly right. It shouldn't be that much, neither rent nor home ownership. What we have done is we have moved it from thinking for people, this builds stable communities. That was sort of the point, right? Why
Right.
did we enter into having all of these other agencies? The agencies were about one thing, building stable communities. So, my suggestion, what can we do? Let's go back to first principles. Go back to what builds the community. And I don't see hedge funds owning builds a community because they don't live there.
Right.
So what I'm going to say is hedge firm, unless you're going to take all your employees and they're going to actually live in every one of those homes that you own, then you are not allowed to control the community because you have destroyed the nature of the community. I want to go back to home ownership as a vehicle towards community building, and then we expand that out to multi-unit home building, which we've sort of moved away from. We're not building much rentable properties, right?
Right.
Anyway, and or even mixed use in the traditional sense. So that would be my short answer, since I see that we're pretty short on
No,
time.
it's okay. Yeah, first principles. It's always good to have, right? You get confused, you get distracted. Just go back to those. And man, I'm gonna tell you a quick story. You may know it already, but I had a son. I have three that are out of the house at Vanderbilt in Nashville from 2017 until 2025. And now they were there the whole time. Obviously, we would go in once or twice a year, and there are entire blocks of multifamily units, you know what I'm going to say, that are owned by hedge funds or venture capitalists just doing Airbnb. Entire blocks. Like we'd be walking down and you'd see just, scaffoldings and cranes and it was interesting again to go in once or twice a year. You actually saw the change in a different way than my sons might have living there, where it's just, little changes every day for 8 years. Um, it's insane. And it just, someone had to say, no, man, you can't, your people want to live here. Yeah, we have a tourism industry, but we also want to build community. We want to have people that actually rent or own, that live and work here and raise families and go to schools here and pay the property taxes that fund the schools and the first responders and so on and so on. And that's been completely ripped apart.
And yeah, and tell me how that helps me. Remember, going back to the social contract, I'm trying to climb this ladder. How in the world am I climbing the ladder up if I don't even own the property? Remember, because this is the largest investment I'm ever going to make. How do I transfer any of that wealth onto my kids? It's all lost.
Yeah, it is. And I'll tell you, like, I've thought about it. I got very lucky when we moved to this little mountain town outside of Denver. No one had heard of it, but after COVID, rural markets kind of went through the roof again through no brilliant, stroke of genius of my own. But I'm looking out now, about to put my fourth kid through college, and the way I retire, I think, is, and it got deservedly a bad rap decades ago, but I think I've predicted it's going to make a comeback, which is reverse mortgages and generational living. We've teased our four sons. We said, look, we got you through. We made it. You know what's interesting, Gary? We had a social contract with our kids when
Yep.
they started school. We said, you keep your nose clean, you make grades, and you figure out what you want to do and where you want to go, and we'll figure out how to pay for it, to get you through. And they honored their end, and we honored ours. And now we're like, okay, each one of you is going to have to take mom and dad for 3 months a year, because we don't know
Exactly.
where we're gonna live now. But yeah, it's that equity passed down from generation to generation. And I grew up in a little home in North Jersey that when my parents died 4 years ago, my brother and I were like, this is a teardown, man. I mean, we love it, props to dad for doing the best he did for 60 years, making the repairs himself, but no one's going to buy this home, and guess what? Somebody did, because it's North Jersey and there are no new homes that have been built in the last 30 years. And people need a place to live, and so parents help the daughter and the husband, right? They had to help the kids. The kids couldn't do it on their own, and it wasn't even that much money. But $500,000 is, you got to have 100,000. Where are you getting $100,000, right, saved up to put down on that home and avoid mortgage insurance and things like that? So, yeah, I think you're right. I think real estate might be the thing that we look back on as the tipping point. But before we sign off, because we still have some time, what do you want to say about the book, and something that someone smarter than me would have remembered to ask you before I let you go on with your day?
Two things. There's 2 points I want to try and drive that I find critically important about why I did this, right? Number one is, when you make a contract with somebody, you have to be aware that in the business context, we could say, I have made the perfect social contract. I have created this perfect ladder to rise up. And anyone who doesn't rise up and doesn't know how to use this ladder, that's on them. I've created this perfect system in the US. So we would call that user error. We would say anyone who doesn't know how to use this ladder, that's their fault. Okay, so let's just say conservatively, we've got 60 million Americans who are substantially lower on the economic ladder than where they should be. So you're going to say you got 60 million Americans, or about 11% of the population, that doesn't know how to use your product. In any other business context, if you had 11% user error, that product would be immediately recalled or at least redesigned. And I talk about this in the book. Just imagine if 11% of kids went around sticking forks into electric outlets. You could honestly say that is user error. And those kids should not be sticking those forks in there. And then immediately afterwards, you redesign those outlets because we have a whole industry called childproofing houses. Why do we childproof houses? Because we know the product could be used in the way it wasn't designed. You could suffer from user error and we don't gain. But when it comes to this product, the health and welfare of the entire country, and we look at these 60 million Americans, we're willing to say, well, that's their problem,
Right.
right? There's no need to redesign anything. That's the first thing. The second thing I would say is mathematically, 60 million doesn't work. And this is where the lottery part comes in. You cannot honestly say that 60 million people, of 60 million, none of them tried to use education as it was designed. None of them tried to use healthcare as it was designed. None of them tried to use entrepreneurship as designed. And then what people are going to say to me, they're going to say, well, Gary, look, of course, it's never going to be the case that everybody was going to make it, right? You just have to think about on average, right? So then I would say, well, then that's a lottery. Because if two people did the exact same thing
Right.
and one of them moved up and the other one didn't, that's a lottery. When you and I both buy a ticket to a lottery and you don't win and I win, you say, well, that was it, right? I saw that. But when you tell me there's a surety that everyone who buys one of these tickets is going to move up the ladder, and then I move up and you don't, then you're going to protest. That's what the book talks about. There's no way that of 60 million people, none of them tried to do the things that got some others ahead.
It doesn't
Some of
add
them,
up. Yeah.
some of them had to.
Yeah.
It's
And
is it a ladder or is it a lottery?
yeah. And I think in the book you used that first half of those 2 points, you talked about the failure rate. Like the failure rate for a product or service, a company, it would never be acceptable, and yet, well, we accept it with our country's infrastructure and
Which I find amazing because you have to understand that the product has to work.
yeah, and also, and this would be another book about how folks that don't see this or don't support um, rebuilding the social contract and making sure it works would all benefit in a way. Like you hear the complaints, right? I can't find people that can learn. I can't find people that show up every day. I can't find welders or whatever. The homelessness. Oh, I don't want to go downtown anymore. Well, guess what, man? You know, it's not. Guess how we got here. But look, man, good nonfiction teaches you something, and I learned a lot. But great nonfiction makes you think, and this book certainly made me think. And I can't thank you enough for the time you spent with me today.
I can't thank you. Seriously. I love to talk about these concepts and I love to talk with informed folks, and you're informed. So thanks a lot. I really
I
appreciate it.
appreciate you. Have a great day.